teams have selected the third topic, that we prefer to be born into a society with high context norms over one with low context norms. Welcome to the EFL Grand Final. Let's start it.
Before starting my speech, I'd like to make some thanks to my team members, which is really precious, Daegyu and Sumin, who lives me a lot on the stages because I just debating for like last 15 months, but they are bringing high motivation to be debating on again and again, and even in the Australs 2026. And also I want to thanks to Hanso and Jungwoo, who leads me a lot into having a big driving forces debating and making this kind of our debate society. And also my parents in South Korea and friends in South Korea, thank you for always having supported me a lot. Yeah, that's all. The status quo we're living on, we're having such an economic benefit with shares or some investment, meaning that there are so many political polarizations and far right and far left are having so many gap between them own circles, and they are never engaging into their other side of politics ideologies because now we are living in the world of self-interest and individualistic societies are really meaningful in their own life as an individuals. But also they have a large gap between the social classes, meaning that there are less social mobility, and also they cannot make any empathy or sympathy to the vulnerable stakeholder because we are living in a world our self-interests are really highly burdened to their own success in their own life. But also, the communication is mixed a lot, meaning that some innovations and some motivation and make a driving force to make a situation more better. But ourselves has made true benefit for a high context situations because we prefer to born in this high context society to further reasons. I think high context societies are meaning that understand each individuals, they're understood and their own mechanisms when they're talking about this better higher than low context community. Meaning that their education is unified a lot because of their own nationalism or understanding other people's organic well. And also they might not have some village and cultural events a lot, so make more strong and solid identity and makes a belonging a lot to each other. And this implies where your belongings are really are, and you have some likelihood when you are adopting another countries or another context, because you are born and you are really familiar with this kind of context, where understandings are really important in your society. And also, second of all, the compound of knowledge are might really be different in the long context and high context, meaning that you might not have chosen trauma or collective ideologies or some reasons, like some colonial period or some big damage in your education systems, or might not have some great depression in your economy as a natural way. Also, it means that your expectations you will advocate together. It means you have motivation to opt into some movement or solving this kind of issues really effectively and also really actively because you have some histories, you are really reaching on some consensus or some problem-solving ideologies with your people and your countries. But also, not only for the individual, but also the culture and formation of other people itself can advocate together to certain kind of issues. And this is really important ideas because the high context knowledge, high context communication levels are really centric ideas about not only delivering your messages, but also understanding other people with these things of compound knowledges or some issues in the market. Meaning that you might not find it when you are talking about people. Meaning that there is some you are having incentives and you are really familiar with finding intentions when you're talking about, when you are talking with. But also, I like to point out how the kind of raw context materials are really happening in their side. I think low context materials are so highly burdens to people, meaning that they have their own centric of argument or their centric for deliberation is that they're delivering their own messages, meaning that not just like it is rather not likely their side of us understanding and some like check some places what your friends wants to talk about. Rather than the centric of the purpose of this conversation might be delivering all your messages is more likely to their side. I like to pointing out why this we work for this kind of high context norms in our circles, meaning that it makes more social cohesion. It makes more social cohesion. Last I set up that, I think we are living in the self-interest a lot, and the self-interest might really achievable and really want people want to be as own individuals. But I think negatives can push it to you as a one individual. They might be wrong way. I think this is self-interest or self-interest or gain or really important benefit and real benefit to incentive to belonging as negative side. But I think when you are not really with people who has more than greatness, at least at some point your nation might be really fragmentation and your policies maker are not really listening to your voices because of more context of materials. And because of that, I think this is the time to need we can prefer the word that high context societies are more better, even if we are living in the world of self-interest or individualistic societies. I like to pointing out how it's really working ourselves. Because I said earlier, this kind of characterization have high, really compounded knowledge from the histories or from some other events. I think you might know who you are against when you're as national and patriotism, and also you might know how the culture affects you a lot. Meaning that this implies you that you might not have influences a lot when you're going to make an option or some changes or when you're going to make some actions. Meaning that it implies you might not think at least, even if you're really selfish person in this high context of an individual, at least the end point is that your national and your colleagues and your friends and your culture is the end of the goal of ultimately changing your options and your changes. I think the South Korea is really big examples to me, these high context communities. As a Korean, I think I'm a really selfish person in this case because I know I'm the one individual who are not care more self-interest and all my benefit. But at least when this kind of things are, when events or some like harmful things happen in South Korea or as people in Korea, I do think the cultural norm and this kind of belongings are really affecting a lot. When you are having another knowledge, when you are having some harmful things in your cases, I think this kind of motivations and makes a belonging and some expectation you might achieve when your people not also where you want. This is more impactful when you are needed. Because I know social movement and advocating something in the social movement and so on, it's not simply working as a solo one. And this is the reason why most of the people are really afraid of advocating social movement because they think they don't have any sources. But the thing is that the possibility of making advocating together and some cohesion and also like the historical workout you might really achieve with your people as a national life or patriotism, I think it really impacts the people when they're taking that kind of movement or advocating something as a one people who are individuals. I mentioned you, even if you are not really a pretty person, you might not have facing some burdens or harmful things when you are really still taking to self-interest a lot in this case. But at the ultimate goal is that you cannot solely individually standing out because you have some limited cases as a human being who are not have who have not big power against them. So the thing is that for the long term, I think this is really impactful to as an individual. At short term, I think they can run with their own selfish and so individualistic are really benefit to the single individual. But for the long term, you might not happen when the status quo are highly sustained in this side. I think at the end of the day, you might not achieve more better solutions or collective actions to proving this kind of and facing and against this kind of like individualistic society or some power hegemony transitions or something other. So how to propose as an option.
from them great judgment and also communication and arrangement. I'm really been amazing. And also shout out for Shanghai University of Finance and Economics, and also my family and friends who is always supporting us. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, and go. First of all, let me frame what a two world looks like. I think in a low content world, it means more direct communication. It means when you heard something, you will believe something. If you want to say something, you just say it. However, in high content, we think that it relies on the content of every single of the world. It means more ambiguous communication. You need more effort and energy to understanding everything. And if you want to express something, it means you need more consideration about how you express it, or what kind of word are you trying to take and use. What is the matter in this debate? We think the most important stakeholder in this debate will be the underprivileged people. Because this debate is about the people it is about a random individual born in a society, so we think it can be any kind of social class. It can be rich or poor. However, we want to emphasize that underprivileged people will be the most important stakeholder here. Because if you're born in a rich family or rich class, it means you will live a decent and low life anyway. You do not even need to pay extra energy to do so. However, if those people living in underprivileged class, they do not have this kind of resources initially, so they will be the more important stakeholder here in this debate. Then come to the first thing here. Why is in high content normal leads to high possibility of misunderstanding compared to low context? First, we think there is more ambiguous and unclear of the language and action. For example, in China, if you during a business dinner, the boss asks you to go out to buy cigarettes, there will be more than 3 possibilities. A, they will ask you to pay for the bill. B, they just want to ask you to go out to leave room for there to have some kind of private talk. C, they just think you should get out because you said something wrong or makes them kind of annoying. So this is not a joke. This is the reality in China right now, and there is possible more than this kind of possibilities. Second thing is about this kind of social norm, this kind of context is ever changing during your different ages and during your different situation and also different groups you are right now in. For example, if you are in the primary school or in the high school or in university or into job area, they have different requirements for you to know this kind of social communication rules and also contacts. So which means you have to pace up and speed up to suit for the social contact. Third thing is that people born in different social classes, some of them do not even have opportunity to learn these kind of rules, especially for those underprivileged people. For 4 reasons. A, this communication rule and form is different. People cannot mutually understanding across different social classes because they have different rules and different forms. B is that the parents of the underprivileged people they do not have this kind of job which need this kind of social norm and also these rules to be really great capacity of this. They do not have this kind of skill, and they don't think it is very important for them to make money because everything they need to do is to get enough food and drink for the family. So they do not even have the incentive to teach their kids about this kind of social norm, and also their friends and communities is different. So we do not think they can have this kind of knowledge at the first place. See that school usually do not have the incentive to teach students about this because this social norm and also this kind of skill is not included in academic field, which means those teachers are likely to expect their students to learn this in the social area and after they get into job area. D is that the future career of those underprivileged people is not likely to be that much need this kind of skill. So in this kind of different career, when they work in society, they are less likely to have the capability or have the opportunity to learn so. In comparison, we think low context norm leads to less misunderstanding for people because they directly express what they want and take less barrier to understand other people. Then comes our impact here. We think first and most important impact is about mental health. We think there are 2 things here. First, you will pay extra efforts and need extra energy for this. If you want to understand others, you need to think it again and again after this kind of communication. It looks like when you get back to home, you will still reflect on the party, someone says something to you, you will think is there anything extra meaning or something like that? So it needs more energy for you to do so. Even if you are quickly reflecting or very familiar of this kind of form, it still needs very exhausting because you need more energy for this. Second thing is that if you want to say something, you need to evaluate every single word, whether or not it is So you need more time to like reflect again before you say something. B3 is about the misunderstanding problem. For example, you all said like you are really a fair person. You will like have some kind of reflection like they are does he think me really like fair and they're great? Is that kind of praising, or he just think I'm very stubborn or things like that? So there is a huge mental burden, and it's also very hard to for you to ask your boss because it's not like possible to ask them this kind of question because it will make you very stupid. So you don't like dare to ask. So you will just rely on your own after again and again. So it is very time consuming and also very energy consuming. It's very exhausting for people to do so. Second impact here we think is about the harm for underprivileged people, which I said before is the most important stakeholder in this debate. We think it is very hard for them to climb a social station. It's hard for them to build connection across the social classes, and also easily for them to behave impolite to other people because nobody told them what to do. Nobody teach them like which is right or wrong. So it's more likely for them to say something aggressive or say something very offensive to other social group very unconsciously because they do not even have the skill or capability and knowledge of this. B is that it's very hard for them to understand because this kind of social work is really likely to dominate by those elite people who is really great educated, so they cannot have this kind of competition with them. C is that even if you try very hard, it's a very slow progress because this kind of stuff is not a knowledge or skill you can just learn it from the book. It's kind of thing you need to like practice in reality. You need to really talk to those people that are important for you. You need to talk in the context. So it's not necessarily those underprivileged people have this kind of opportunity to talk with them, to make some kind of mistake and error, and still have the opportunity to do so again to try and like prove whether or not your knowledge is true or wrong. So it's nothing they have that much opportunity to try and error. So and the fourth thing is that it will generate a certain kind of stigmatization for underprivileged people as implied, rude, and non-decent. Because those upper classes will think that underprivileged people do not have this kind of capability and skill. They will think they are not decent when they communicate together. They will think they are very rude and implied when they say something and do not know this kind of rule. So they do not even have the opportunity before they break this kind of social stigmatization. So they will have no possibility for them to cross the class and climb the social status. So in comparison, we think low context is better for underprivileged people because you need to just improve your skill and knowledge, which is very hard to evaluate, which is very fixed standard of those people to evaluate you, but not like this kind of ambiguous thing to evaluate you as implied, as rude, as non-decent, and try to defend you or things like that. So it will be more easier for those underprivileged people to get better treatment and better opportunity in the society. Based on all of this, very proud to propose.
I think first lady last week, and I will second and third lady to continue the debate.
Before anything, thank you for my teammates to come all the way to Australia with me, and secondarily, thank you to the Korean contingency that are rooting for us. For some reason, Scientific wants this debate to be about veil of ignorance and how the rich people does not matter. We just simply concede to this fact, and we do believe that the most marginalized people are important. However, as per this motion, being an actor motion, we would like to first clarify a few things. We believe that this actor is probably an average individual. This probably means that we flip your case on capacity by saying that if you're born into a simple context of either side of the house, you probably feel comfortable about this. You buy into the context from when you were born, so I don't think feeling comfortable is a unique delta that they're able to prove. But secondarily, I think the biggest delta in this debate is when you move from one culture to another, and how you have a better safety net, and how it's much more easier to assimilate on our side of the house is what's going to prove. what we're going to prove. The burden of this debate then is to A, why is it good for the individual on like either side of the house in specific context, and secondarily, when a group of these individuals from small to 100 is able to make change, and this like also I'm going to be dealing with the social mobility push that they have. Third thing then is on how transition is much more easier and is done in a better way on side affirmative. Moving on then to some rebuttals. The first thing they say is that it's very ambiguous and unclear and it just becomes very difficult for you to buy into this culture. First, we reject this premise because from the Daegyu board, you're already comfortable with this culture. You already learned this, so I don't know why you're going to be able to have these types of unique harms on our side of the house. And secondarily, they give us the mechanism about like China cigarettes and whatnot. I think this is like also like quite uncharitable because I think the only reason why you're able to catch this nuance is because you are from China and that you understand. If I was in that context, I would simply just buy cigarettes for my mouth and leave it be. But the secondary thing that they push is on social mobility, which I will address in my second substantive argumentation. First thing is on the characterization of each norms, because I think this is what missing analysis coming from side negative. The first thing is on what high context norms actually looks like. These countries probably have a shared history and relationships. Oftentimes, these are countries that are like very homogeneous, that has been through like hardship as a whole. I.e., countries like South Korea, Japan, that have a collective ideology. We have had same harms, we have shared identity losses, so on and so forth. The impacts part here are simple. We have a shared culture. Secondarily, we have things like nepotism. But also, it probably means that in cases of hardship, we have a unique identity that we can relate to with each other. The second context, in high context like things, are probably how education systems revolve around. This probably thing, we have singular forms of education, things like nationalism, so that this context of like high context can actually work from the day of birth. This probably means like we have things like mandatory ethic classes and going to like traditional heritages, so that we can actually foster this type of culture and context from the very get-go. This also looks like things like chosen trauma and cohesion on what we're going to go through, and so on and so forth. This is why we have a lot of collective action on our side of the house. We can see like actions from South Korea when we boycott against Japan, if Japan's like administration is doing something wrong, so on and so forth. What does it look like in the comparative of low context norms? These look like probably more individualistic things and norms. These are people that are more confrontational and also comfortable with being confrontational. They care less about what others think about because these are probably nations that have a history of being more stronger. They were only able to be confrontational because they actually had the power to do that because of power asymmetry. Societies in these countries thus then evolve on how well they are able to portray what they actually want, and thus then they become more confrontational. Oftentimes, as just historical information, and like they probably have more pragmatic things that occur on their side of the house. Moving on then, what the context of this like status quo actually looks like, and why it's just good for an individual to be born inside affirmative's world. This looks like, in a status quo where individualism and isolationist like theories, also realism and conservative politics is on a rise, I think we do have to concede that a lot of individuals are going to be quite individualistic on either side of the house. The difference here is that when we face like things like hardships, the problem of the comparative is even when you when you face hardships, I think it's going to be like selfish on the individual level. The delta here is that when you face hardships, on our side of the house, even if you do have different beliefs on the individual levels, I think we do have like a common value, i.e. fighting against Japan, and like retaliating against countries that we don't like, we have chosen trauma against this. What the comparative on their side of the house probably looks like is that you have A, pragmatic values, but B, it just means it's much more difficult for the leadership to cater to a specific individual, thus that it's making less more efficient for you to actually make social change on their side of the house. This probably looks like what happened in South Korea when we had like propaganda about rigged elections that are currently happening in the status quo. If this was a low context society, I think A, on the comparative, just because it's very sensitive about talking about rigged elections in a democratic like situation, especially when it's on the comparative, I think we cannot talk about it explicitly because on our side of the house, if we say that it's something sensitive, at least on our side of the house, we can have non-verbal cues, we have shared history on how we were being like deprived of democracy back in the 1980s, so on and so forth. I think then it just means that we have more empathy, it just becomes much more easier, but secondarily, it's less explicit to the way that we're actually able to hide it under the surface and actually make change. This is why in the status quo, both far left and far right people, like individuals, came together in the Olympic Park and fighting for the same values on our side of the house. This entails change is much more easier. The people on the affirmative sides are should be willing to take the trade-off for the better good. Moving on then, why then is the unique delta here is on in terms of changing from one culture to the next? I think this is where the most delta occurs, because I think we have to concede on either side of the house, you probably feel comfortable, you probably do understand what these sense of non-verbal cues or explicit confrontational things look like on either side of the house, you probably do feel comfortable. This means that the unique delta is when you try and move to other countries, to other cultures. This is uniquely important because as per the status quo, a lot of people do want to move to other cultures. Things like just being globalized world, secondarily looking for other types of opportunities, for jobs, but also looking for like immigration. You have more opportunities outside of your own country. You want to like go for exploration or whatnot. You probably have incentives to leave your country. I think there is no unique delta when you go from one culture that is high context to high culture, or does it mean that there's going to be a unique delta when you go from low to low? I think that the unique delta that exists is that first, when you move from a high context culture to a low context culture, sure, there are going to be different forms of nuances that you might not know on from the very beginning of your life. But when you're born in a world of affirmative, you probably, the first thing you will do when you move from one culture to the other is that you probably want to identify the nuances so that you don't look rude on our side of the house. This looks like the first thing you do when you go to a foreign country is ask about things like whether I should be tipping the waiter, because if I don't pay the waiter, would it look rude? Whether I should do things like recycling, whether I should put my shoes off when I go to a room, so on and so forth. This probably means at best what they are able to push is that you're probably going to look naive. But at least on our side of the house, when you move from a high context to low context people will going to be more confrontational, and they're going to tell you what you should change, and we are more likely to actually make change and assimilate into these sets of new culture. What happens on the comparative is that you're more likely to be confrontational and rather push on your own values because you are a bit more selfish on their side of the house. This leads to two impacts. First, on backlashes because maybe you're being disrespectful and people dislike you. But secondarily, people feel more uncomfortable. What happens on the comparative is that you move into low, high context cultures, and insofar as their own observation is that we are very naive and we won't tell you about these types of things, then I think it's much more unlikely for you to actually identify a lot of the policies and mistakes you're being able to make. So I think at the end of the day, we're able to prove assimilation on our side of the house is better. But secondarily, if there are metrics on social mobility, we have better forms of social mobility because we have better forms of Croatian. Affirm.
Wonderful. I then second the speech, and I will second Daegyu to use the debate.
Before I start my speech, I want to express my gratitude to Chadha University of Finance and Economics and also the Chinese debating communities for always supporting us. I would also like to say thank you to my family and friends for always supporting me. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. 3 responses to the affirmative side. First, on the case of individualism and selfishness that claim a low society are more likely to act in this way. 3 layers of response. First, we do not make this necessary true. First, we do not prove directly why a low context society necessarily lead to individualism and selfishness. Secondly, empirically we believe that it's untrue here. We have seen lots of nations like maybe the USA and EU, maybe Australia have the best social welfare here. That do not mean individualistic and selfish, meaning that the societies have less empathy for individuals. We believe that this is not necessarily true. Secondly, we do not even think that so-called individualism and selfishness is a uniquely bad thing for people born into the societies. It is not that bad, because individualism means that the societies generally have a more respect of personal freedom here, is that we can let people care more about self than most people have to care about other people. That is just a less mental burden on people, and it also will put you a less mental burden in the communication with people, because individualism is a good thing for you. Thirdly, we do not think such kind of individualism and this conception is that bad for people. The big impact that prove it is easier to join a social movement or political change or something like that. Which means that for an individual, these are not the most important things here. It may be easier for you to join it, not in a social movement or political change is necessary to happen or successful for you. It is more likely to put a lot of time and energy into it and have no outcome at the end of the day. So we do not really have a unique idea at the end of the day. The second case that comes with is the cultural competition. Oh, it is India in high context society for people to have the shared history, shared culture, and build competition with each other. Firstly, we do not think that such kind of cultural competition is necessarily here. Having a strong attachment to your history and culture also means the society is maybe super conservative here, because most of the historical values act in this way. Being collectivism is also maybe a bad thing, because it is you are more likely to be forced in the society to follow the will of other people due to this kind of high context norm that usually in the historical culture there's kind of you have a power chain that you have to follow to someone who is more powerful than you. You have to be conservative and cannot embrace this new hours, or you will be seen as a traitor of this kind of culture and be marginalized in this society. Collectivism there suggests this prioritizing of personal freedom and also the individual autonomy, which is bad at the end of the day. Secondly, we believe that cultural competition also exists in a local society here. We do not think that, we think that many local societies also have this unique culture. For example, the USA, everyone buys the ideology of democracy and freedom. In Australia also they act in this way here. We believe that these things can also form strong cultural competitions here. Things like the same ideology, things like we have the same intention, same history of fighting independence or things like that. We do not think a cultural thing or a high context communication is necessary for a cultural or societal competition. Third response is a claim from the DPM that, oh, it is just more easy for you to move from a high context culture to a low context one, compared with vice versa. For a curious response here, first, we do not think it's just easier. We believe that if you move from high to low, you suffer from the same amount of problem here. Because many times in communication, you just think that, oh, you actually express something, or you hint upon something, and the other person should actually understand, but other people actually not, because they live in a low context society here. That's what we call misunderstanding and miscommunication, which can also be detrimental to your development in a new society. Secondly, we believe that this is even not a problem at the end of the day, because immigration targets, all the popular immigration targets in the world are mostly low context nations. For example, USA, Europe, UK, Australia are all low context society. There are actually a reason behind this, because of this kind of low context society, just as we have said, do not have this kind of strong attachment to its history and its culture. That means it is much more easy for immigration to be here. So we do not think it is highly likely for this kind of move from a low to high context society even happen, because most of immigration targets are low context. The majority, or almost all of them, are in this way. 2, 3 extensions here. First, onset attack on the stakeholder of this motion should be an average individual. Yes, we agree, but we will argue 2 things. Firstly, we believe that such decision, whether you prefer to fall into a society or not, should be made behind the veil of ignorance. That means you do not know what class you are born in. That's why the underprivileged people are just more important in this debate, because people are roughly risk adverse here. You carry a significant high amount of risk when you are randomly born into the underprivileged family compared with a rich family here. So you should make this decision based on what underprivileged people have a better life in this society, because it means a higher risk and more important decision for you. You do not want to be born poor in a high context family, and it is possible to climb up the social ladder. If you are born in rich one, that doesn't matter here. Secondly, even when we take the framing of average individual here, we do not think that average people are actually the elite group in the society. They are more likely to be born into a working class family, be born into still need to climb a social ladder here, the high context society, because usually the majority countries are developing nations, an average individual is just not that privileged here. That's why the thing we have taken in this matter, because it is just harder for even an average individual to climb up the social ladder in a high context society. 2 important distinctions here. First, regarding underprivileged people, why this kind of communication methodology in a high context society is highly related to your class you're growing. We did that is because this kind of context itself is different between different classes. For example, if you are elite class, you're a white-collar worker, that means every day you are maybe going to those kind of business meetings, business dinners here. You have a way of communicating with each other. For people growing a family with average families here, their parents do not have an exposure to these things. They only know what is likely to negotiating with workers, they do not know the manner you have to have a business behavior. That's why the children do not actually get this skill. And usually schools in those kind of high classes, they do not teach those kind of skills. The schools only usually focus on academic performance, and such as communication skill has nothing to do with it. They just anticipate you to graduate learning in the social interactions of your family, which is impossible for another to teach you. Secondly, why the learning burden is uniquely high in this kind of high context society? Well, Garvey had already proved because you need to train those kinds of talking skills as an instinct, comparing with just getting them as some kind of knowledge, or I just have a knowledge of what is a good thing to say, and I have a skill with good thing to say. That is not enough. But if this kind of conversation happens in 1 second, when others finish their work, you need to react in 1 second, actually to make the correct result. You have to make those kind of skills instinctive, not just learn the knowledge, not just know how to talk, but you have to make an instinct. That actually requires thousands of types of trial and error. You do not grow up in such kinds of elite families here. When you are not exposed to those kinds of experience, when you are at a young age here, when you grow up, when you graduate from college, you need thousands of trials to learn this kind of thing. But study will not give you a chance. You're just doing so many job opportunities because the boss said you just do not know what the elite class communication ways look like. The comparative here is in a low complex society is much more easier because everyone is telling others what they are thinking about. Everyone is communicating the information in a very direct way here. There's no burden to understand those kind of context and having to make it instinctive here. That's why the underprivileged school is better off at the end of the day. Also, it's true for mental health comparison. When we derive communication, it's far more likely here. You do not spend extra energy to consider what you are going to say or what others are actually meaning. They are always proud to oppose.
Wonderful. I think second speech, and I will third voting to continue the debate.
Before I start, I want to give thanks speech for 한솔 선생님 처음 디베이트 시켜주셔서 너무 감사하고 앞으로도 열심히 가서 일을 하겠고 예송이랑 대규 오빠 여기까지 불러줘서 너무 고맙고 엄마 아빠 그리고 메이슨 코리아, 레이아 코치님, 림펄 다 너무 감사드리고 정우쌤 시간 투자해서 강남까지 와서 가르쳐주셔서 감사하고 그리고 for the Australs I might be the most EFL person. Thank you for me to being here and give us opportunity and scholarship. And thank you, Alexis, to be our mentor. I'm the person who has been born and raised and lived for 20 years in high-tech norm society. I just went to the US university, still campus in Korea, but the people and education system was totally different. I met the first time of low context norm society. This was my first time living in those places. It was quite different when I first arrived here, and in the same context and same everything. What I watching was different. What I was watching same content in different perspective. I could not really separate the whole minorities. I always connect myself with the minority I learned, and even I always doubt what I learned it is what the real minority wants. What is the things that I can do for them? Is there any connection with me? So I agree about I am overthinking and I regret sometimes about my attitude because I have too much stress. When I'm just studying about midterm exam, I'm not only studying about midterm, I'm studying about the minority, refugee, about isolated people, isolated youth. What is the common situation in the global crisis? So in this case, I need to spend more time. I need to spend my more energy compared to the other US university students and professors. They saw them as in the third party position, just as, oh, they're doing like that, and that's it. So I believe that I am overusing my resource and energy, but still these kind of things are really important because I spend more time and energy to invest what the society could do and what I need to contribute. I join in the fundamental part in their life, not the current situation. I do not separate themselves. I do not just think they're the poor guy. I'm just thinking they're part of the society, they're part of our community, and they're part of me. I can really approach what is the true difference with them. I spend more time and research and observe, and I believe that it was not wasting the time. It investing myself to community and to be changed, and it will be more helpful to approach the vulnerable people in our society. And also, I'm not observing only the others. I'm observing myself every time. Who am I? What I have to be different? What I should do with my relationship? I'm seeing myself in not myself, but also history, relationship, and how the process of thinking in my step by step. I always consider those kind of things and thinking because I'm not only someone who lives alone. I'm the someone with the society, with everyone. I'm not only thinking about my direct I feel, however, inner myself. I just think about what I do with my relationship and what I do, think about my attitude to others. I always find what I really want to do in that time. I always curious, and it makes me more think deep and magnitude thoughts rather than I'm thinking myself and also others to judge and define which of me. I'm thinking I'm becoming the better person if I really truly define myself. For me, life is defining myself who I really is. I feel happy when I define myself rather than just saying my success or just who I am in the society. This debate is for why it is specifically good for individuals. Our push is two. One is this world is more understanding in the human itself. It is possible in the not privileged people because what our first speaker said, education. We have a same education. We have a unified education system. In Korea, we use the same textbook in every country, whole country. Even if they are poor people, they learn the same thing. And also, not only the public education, in our side of the world, village, parents, and society learn how we think and how we act, what is the true values we need to care. In this kind of the world, what our second speaker just said, most important data when they met new society and new person, it is more easy for them to understand and assimilate because they doesn't really predict or judge as based on themselves. They already have a data to think about what is the society needs to go and what is the true values to do. They have more understanding and more observation data to understand others. And also for the original belonging, they feel like they are in the part of the society more strongly, more interest to community, more scale and to consider. And also they could think more themselves like me. They always could answer about themselves who I am related to everything in the world. And second, for the society, it will be better for the society to move forward because we doesn't separate the minority with me. We think about they are part of the community, and even in the different class, they have some of the same values about, like for Korea. I really like Japan, but when I learn about Japanese history, I feel like bad dudes are the enemies, and this kind of at that time. And this kind of value will be all true for the all Koreans. So it will be power to move forward together. And also, because we have a same value in Korea, by having the better world and better Korea again, so when we do action, we have a collective values, we have a collective goals. Without the individual's interest, we think about society first, how we could improve the society. It will be more probability to change the society, and we believe that better society could impact for the individuals in the positive impact. In their world, they push the two things. First is low context is different with the selfish. However, it is true that they are thinking about individuals in the first place rather than thinking about having the same idea. And second, they said it will be less. It will, in their side of the world, is better to vulnerable people because they have less resource. But we believe that that is truly wrong. Because when the society needs to change, or society could change, the policy is the really important thing. And when the policy maker just listen to the voice, for that, the vulnerable people have less resource to let so low opportunity to speak the direct voice. However, in our side, we think even if we are not the vulnerable people, we speak the voice together, and that could be the more burden for policy makers to be proved and change in the society. We could make the world better. And lastly, they have two impacts. And first is mental health, and we prove that we is better because first we think about having a safety net, and second we can think more deep in ourselves. And second impact was they could concentrate in themselves first. But if the society is just living alone, it will be more easy, better to when you invest the whole resource on yourself. However, the world is not true. World is some place that we live all together. We all live together. We need to consider all relations. We need to consider about people living together. In this case, in our side, it's better to improve the society and themselves too. Thank you.
Before the start of my speech, I would like to shout out to some person. So a few days ago, I just graduated from my bachelor degree, which is Shanghai University of Finance and Economy. And probably after this speech, I'll graduate from here. So at this very moment, I want to shout out to all my amazing coaches, Julie and Daisy, and also the graduate that is also part of our debate team that we gone through a lot in debate. That is Mary, Wendy, and Daegyu. Thank you all for supporting me and letting me be able to stand at this point and just come.
Right, before you begin, if you speak slightly louder than your thank you speech, or closer to the microphone.
Is this better?
That's better, thank you.
Okay. Two things in the speech. First of all, more contextualization in terms of why high context society will necessarily bring more pressure to young people and to vulnerable people in our society. Second of all, rebuttal to the entire affirmative bench in terms of their argument. So first of all, why we believe that it is going to necessarily be harder for people that is vulnerable, i.e. the young people and poor people in society. So first of all, let's bring poor people in this debate. Poor people, when you are basically poor, you are probably working class people. You're working in factory, you're working with machine. This kind of job requires you to be accurate, and this kind of job do not require you to communicate with a lot of people that much. So basically, the language you're using is going to be more direct and less contextualized based, because every day they're working in factory, what they're facing is factory, it's machine. They're not necessarily communicate with people that's higher than them, communicate with the people, for example, important political boss or important business client. Obviously, they don't really know how to talk with this kind of person. And obviously, this is going to add barrier for people that is from the lower class to climb up the social ladder. But comparably, we believe that white-collar worker or the work that basically will give you much more payments in today's society, require you to have a lot of face-to-face communication, require you to communicate with people that's far more above you, require you to talk to the client, require you to be polite, because you are probably negotiating with people that's powerful in today's status quo. So obviously, this kind of cases when you are from a poor background, you are basically speaking very direct way, people will consider you as rude. People will say, even that these poor people, these
these people have very good skill, but because they cannot communicate, because they are acting rude in a business party, they're unlikely to get promoted or just get recruited as a whole, because communication is very important in a business schedule, especially in high-paying related jobs like finance, consultant. You need to have a lot of the communication bring you the network, communication bring you money for the revenue of the company. Basically, this is the reason why we believe that poor people will not necessarily be undermined into the status quo. And consider the fact that they're already facing a lot of the structural problems, they probably are less likely to get good education. We believe that it is far more important than their case about collectivism, about social movement, to basically just adding more pressure for poor people to climb up the social ladder, to give them more imbalance when they are already living in an unfair society. Moving on to the young people, why we believe that young people as a whole, this is a very general case, is also going to be harmed in a high contact society. Basically because when you are young, when you communicate with your friend, it's more about an equal status communication. You're communicating with people from similar background that is not about you. You don't really need to mind a lot of the contact, stuff like that. But when you're in workplace, when you're communicating with your boss or your client, obviously it involves more politeness, it involves more manner. Basically all of this is something that it is very hard for you to learn before you enter workplace. For example, in Chinese, when you address you, there's two type of pronunciation to address you, ni and yin. Basically, the first one is used for people that is equal with you. The second one is used with people that is above you. All of this adding more pressure for you to learn. Adding something, this is just an example. There's a much more complicated communication strategy you have to use when you're communicating with someone above you. All of this give you an extra barrier to basically enter a workplace. When you want to communicate with your boss, he will supervise you. They will make sure you're not going to be rude, you're not going to be impolite, because this will actually give you a lot of backlash in terms of people will think you are funny, people will think you are rude, people will think you are just a stupid young people that don't know how to communicate into this society. They will think you are far behind, and they will think you are a joke. Obviously, all of this will bring a lot of young people into a lot of pressure when they first enter workforce. And we believe all of this can be avoided in a low contact society when you just address people equally, when you just use a very direct way of speaking. Obviously, it's going to be making things better. Moving on to the bottom part, in terms of why we believe affirmative side don't give a generous cases. First of all, they talk about individualism versus collectivism, and believe that in Aristotle House, individualism will kill the country. So first of all, I just don't think this is true, that because of a lot of the low contact society, individualism and high contact society are collectivism necessarily means that this high contact or low contact and individual and collectivism is necessarily correlation, not correlation. Maybe this is just an incident. Maybe because this is something that affects in both ways. So there is a missing link from the affirmative team to talk about why the way you say, whether it's high contact or low contact, necessarily make you, in the end, individualism or collectivism. We believe this is a missing link from the opposition that they fail to, from the affirmative that they fail to prove. Secondly, in terms of, we think there's more important aspect to influence people in terms of collectivism and individualism. For example, there's a lot of cultural influence. There's a currently increasing trend of individualism bring up by a lot of Western propaganda, a lot of Western movies, and also the consumerism. Basically, the culture is changing. Even you're speaking high contact language like Chinese, the young people are still being much more individualism than before. And speaking this language does not stop them from doing this. So I don't think this link exists in the Aristotle House. Lastly, we just don't necessarily think it's a good thing to be collectivism, like my partner Daniel already talked about. Collectivism means you need to be as a union. It means you have a fixed pattern of what is your life going to be like. Because you don't want to be the one that's strange. You don't want to be the one that's unique. This is the person that's going to be criticized. Obviously, you don't want to give up on finance job for art major, because basically this is not what people do in this society. We believe this kind of oppression of personal interest and personal feeling, it is not necessarily a good thing into the society. And secondly, we believe that society, diversity matters, right? Economy matters. In a union society where a lot of people are very populist, a lot of people are very collectivism, we are necessarily more resistant to diversity, like a lot of people from different cultural backgrounds, like people that are from different race. In China, in Korea, there's a lot of problem of like racial discrimination, stuff like that. I don't think this is a good thing. Secondly, you're reluctant to people like technology abroad, better culture abroad, you're reluctant to the talents abroad. This necessarily will harm your economy as a whole. I just don't think this is a good thing. Moving on to the second point about their speech. About immigrants, because immigrating ourselves is going to be harder because you're moving from a low context society to high context society. Firstly, I just don't think this matters because immigrant is not necessarily happening when you are born in a high context society. Actually, immigrant is very hard because of visa policy. You need to find a job, you need to get into a different culture. We don't think this is necessarily important into this debate. And secondly, we just don't think it is also like very easy adverse, like you are moving from high to low. Because obviously the third speaker already talked about, she has faced a lot of difference when she's moving to a low context society. You might suffer more because you have a direct blame rather than a very indirect way to blame. You might suffer more because you have hard to communicate. You are always speaking very indirectly, while your classmates are speaking very directly. This is not necessarily a good thing. Moving on to very quickly about last point. National identity and social change. Their mechanism is like politicians will be giving more better policy, but we believe this is not true. Politicians care about votes only. And we believe that like the way you speak do not necessarily influence what kind of policy you're going to vote for. Based on their work, I'll just stand on that.
Start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Let's just look through the affirmative statements to see why it cannot take this debate. In the first case, it's our social conditions and also those cultural types are much more needed in high-context society. The first impact here is, you are more likely to have empathy and certain kind of collectivism. We have often dealt with two very important responses here. Firstly, we believe that these two things are not necessarily related. Human develop into a certain kind of level of empathy in a certain kind of way. For example, we can see that called low context societies like UK, US, Australia have the best, and Western Australia. This necessarily means they have more empathy, so this link is not necessarily true. Secondly, we believe that things like whether you choose empathy or collective way is highly related to human history here. Because human history is always moving in a kind of progressive way and focusing more on individualism. Even in a high-context society, it is not necessary for you to just be more collectivistic or just to be more anti-static and collaborative. But more probably, this is empirically true. We can see that under some contexts have very different societies here. For example, Singapore and maybe China are all Mandarin-speaking countries, but they have very different societies. North Korea and South Korea have the same level of context, but they have very constant society. This is sufficient to prove why the society, the format of politics is not even related to whether it is a high context or not. Right? Secondly, we have proved you that certain kind of so-called collectivism and culture can even be coercive to people. In cases of culture is super conservative and collectivism actually divide individual autonomy. The second thing is, you will have better politics here because the politicians are more likely to be linked with people. Philippa has already told you that politicians only care about those here. In case you have a democracy, it doesn't have to do anything to do with the context here because these models will not give you policies. Secondly, we have already also told you that these things do not actually prove a direct link here. They only mean it's such kind of social here, cultural type, we're just doing more emphasis here, which we have already proved is not actually true. We have, the third thing is our intuitions. We believe that we have already framed you with two responses. First, we believe that involve same amount of difficulties, just as also proved by the third affirmative speaker. Secondly, we have proved you that most of the time you are moving to a non-local society. There are no things such as vice versa, so this claim is not even relevant to this debate. What have learned is our unique contribution in this debate. First, we successfully proved why high society necessarily a more mental burden. We are actually seeing a world. It is very energy consuming for you to think over what does others mean and what you are trying to express. This is even true even if you are very familiar, very strong, and native speakers here. You have to have those kind of thinking buried in your mind. Even if you do not feel it, it is still energy consuming because your brain has to work actively for those kind of things. Secondly, we believe that the burden for reasoning also exists here because it is quite ambiguous. You need to think twice about what your boss really means. You really can't fall asleep at night because you do not know when your boss is criticizing you or praising you. Thirdly, people also tell you there's a significant pressure for young people in this kind of society because we just do not have the better condition to feel compared to the elder generation. That is mental burden. We are entering the career. We do not know what is the correct thing here. Compared with local society here, the burden of communication is much easier. People just say what they want to say. Second thing, social mobility is here. We believe that it is matter, even if you are finding a case of average person, because the average person is not me. The most likely from a developed country and working class, consider the worst situation here. We realize that it's much easier because we do not need to understand the context, but can really communicate with them. We just have to achieve academic excellence in this world, get a better job, not those kind of using because they are failed to have communities here. Last way here is that two things. First, we prove you a stronger name to impact here, while they do not prove that name. Secondly, we focus on this directly individual impact of whether a person has mental burden here, whether it is easy for a very person to move up the social ladder, compared to the weight impact of politics about society, which is quite indirect. Based on all this, we're proud to oppose.
Wonderful. I thank Nathan for replying to that speech, and now to conclude the grand final, another reply.
First, one strategic observation, Side wants to push that these people on our side of the house will feel uncomfortable. This is simply a premise that we reject from the very get-go. I think as per the motion side, without collective thoughts, shared histories, and shared relationships, I think high context had worked from the very get-go, making it a motion squarely on their side of the house. The second thing to note here, and this was also true, I think there are also going to be like discrepancies. Some people might feel uncomfortable when you're confrontational on their side of the house also. This is to entail that we're able to weigh on three metrics. First on setup and how we have collectivism and how this is good for the individual. Secondarily, on the likelihood of success and cohesion. Third, on how assimilation and the process of transition is going to be much smoother on our side of the house. First, on the veil of ignorance, because I guess this is a push that we want to credit a lot. First thing to note here is that if this is true, because your parents can't teach you the manners in terms of work and you probably aren't able to relate to this, I think first you're born into this, which probably means that you have 20 years to actually acknowledge the nuance from the very get-go. But secondarily, if they are so marginalized and they have so much of a discrepancy, I think it's also proportional to their side of the house. There's probably going to be a spectrum of different levels of confrontational things on their side of the house. I am not sure how much I can actually credit this. But even in low context things, I think how will you teach these things on their side of the house anyways? I think also, the second thing to note here is that on the likelihood of spectrum, I think it is more charitable on our side of the house to push that you probably have to buy into the context of an average individual, thus I think we also win on likelihood of the individual. Second thing on social change then, because affirmative better, I think we have better forms of genetic identity as per the motion and also per the analysis coming from first. We tell you a lot of the times high context things probably includes things like social trauma, a singular form of education, homogeneous like individuals, non-verbal cues, implicit meaning probably means regardless of social class, you have some form of things that you relate to. This is a trade-off that negative had to take within this debate, and they do not do so. This entails in terms of social change on the comparative you have fragmented values, which probably entails it just becomes more difficult for you to make a cohesion, but further it just becomes much more easier for the leadership to cater to this. On affirmative, narrative, we have implicit ways of communicating things that are more sensitive, which probably means it becomes much more easier to talk about these things. Even with different values, I think we come together in terms of hardship because we have nationalistic values. That's probably why we did the coalition in face of IMF, things like political conflict against Japan, so on and so forth. We have two impacts on our side that improve, first on united forms of identity, and secondarily on why we have better forms of cohesion on our side of the house. The second thing to note here is on assimilation, and the only pushback from side negative is that, it's difficult to get visas. Sure, it's difficult to get visas, but I'm not too sure as to how this rebuttal actually stands in the day. I think we already tell you that as an average individual, you do have incentives to leave your country, looking for opportunities, for better job opportunities. But also, maybe it's because you just want to explore. This probably means, even if you don't like any of our analysis weighing on the other two things on social mobility and cohesion, I think you ought to buy this debate, ought to buy this push on assimilation. Because, as so far as both teams do agree, if you're moving from one context to one context that's same, I don't think there's a unique delta. The delta here is that when you move from high context to low context, sure, there are going to be different forms of nuances, but I will already tell you from second, this is the first thing you want to identify because you don't want to look rude if you're coming from a high context society. You probably want to look good, you probably want to catch the nuances, and that's why you want to opt in for better forms of assimilation. Worst case scenario, people do think that you're naive or you are not communicating. But at least on our side of the house, when you come from a high context moving into low context, these people aren't, as their own observation, are going to be confrontational. They're going to tell you what to fix. On the flip side, on the comparative, I think it's more likely to be if you're coming from a low context society and you're more confrontational, you will probably rather push on your own values. This probably leads to things like backlash, you're getting feelings that people are feel that you're being disrespectful. In fact, secondarily, people feel that it's uncomfortable. But most importantly, they will not likely identify these issues for you. At the end of the day, I think we're able to win on identity of this individual. Secondarily, on social change, third on how we have better forms, more successful assimilation. For all those reasons, based in Korea.